Hey there, this is Taylor Ellwood with Magical Experiments, and I'm really super excited today because joining me is Julian Crane, who is the author of Chaocentric, as well as a book of interviews that he did, as well as a book of interviews as well. So two books, Chaocentric, and then the book of interviews that he did with a bunch of other occultists, me included. And I've had him on my old podcast before, so I'm really excited to have him here and actually get to see him for the first time, because it was always just voice before. So Julian, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Sure. Thank you very much, Taylor. As you said, I'm Julian Crane. I am a writer, I'm an author, a content producer. I do animation, I record music. Professionally, the muggle job, as I like to call it, I'm a digital marketing specialist. On the flip side of that, in my more magical endeavors, I write, I practice magic, and my practice is very eclectic. I kind of borrow from various places. Hoodoo, candle magic. I'm currently working through Johann Trithamius's The Art of Drawing Spirits into Crystals. So I tend to be rather eclectic. I borrow from various places, and I try to combine the magical and the mundane to create positive change in my life.
Excellent. And I've known you for a few years now, I think, online. So it's always been interesting to interact with you, and it's good to have you on the show here. Let's talk a little bit about how you got into magic, and then go from there, because I also want to talk a bit about how you weave magic into your mundane life. But let's first talk about how you got into magic in the first place. How old were you? What prompted you to get into magic?
Well, in one way, it was always part of my life because I was raised as a conservative Protestant Christian. So, I had been aware of magic since I was at least 5 or 6 years old, but always with, the warning that it's it's a no-no, stay away from that sort of thing and people who do that. In my early teens, I want to say maybe even between the ages of 12 and 13, I started wanting to learn more about the world outside of my religion at the time. So I started reading a lot of comparative religion stuff, books on Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, the Tao Te Ching, pretty much anything I could get my hands on. And by the time I was 15, I started experimenting with marijuana, which has been sort of a partner in crime, so to speak, for quite some time. And it was between the ages of 15 and 28, where as I was having these psychonautic experiences, whether through meditation or through the use of, entheogens, I realized that everything I had been told clearly wasn't true. And at the same time that there was, subconscious realms, spiritual realms, places that didn't necessarily fall into what many people considered to be normal everyday reality. So I would say it was around the age of 21. I had been reading about magic probably for about 5 years at that point. And I was working in the back of a retail shop making copies for a business of that type of production. And so I would sit there and I had a private office space with a computer, and I'm running thousands of copies. And I just had to sit there and hit a button occasionally. So during that time, I was reading a lot about magic, what I could find online. And specifically, it was Hermeticism that sort of tipped me over the edge. I think it began with just some random web pages on the internet, reading about perennialist philosophy, reading about the Kabbalion, which I eventually read, then, finding like the esoteric archives and reading, the actual Hermetic texts, and then discovering grimoires and things of that nature. I think it was between 2010 and 2013, I really started putting everything I was reading into actual praxis. I can't say, I don't remember exactly the very first magical spell I ever did. Actually, no, that's not true. I just thought of it as I did it. I did a very ad hoc improvised version of the Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram. I had no idea what I was doing. And I'm sure if I was to go back and actually look at it, it probably didn't actually look anything like the LBRP. But I do distinctly remembering having a feeling of liberation. Having been raised a Christian, there was that little voice in the back of my head that was like, well, shit, if I get this wrong, or if I'm even doing this right, maybe all hell will break loose. And of course, nothing happened because I probably didn't even do anything significantly magical. But the act in itself, whether it was purely psychological or not, absolutely freed me from any hangups I had about moving forward and leaving behind some of the, religious stuff. And so you zoom up a few years later, I'm working at a company, and I had been experimenting quite a bit with sigils, shoaling, and I actually, at that time, was like, I'm going to sign up for Jason Miller's strategic sorcery course, but I didn't have the $150. I was still, making nominal money at a job that I wasn't sure whether it was going to be long-term or not. So I did a sigil shoal specifically to get the company to pay for it, which, up to that point, I had been doing magic for silly things just to prove that it existed. Like, I'm going to find an orange tennis ball today, or it's going to rain 3 days from now. Random stuff. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. So I did that. And to grease the wheels from a mundane standpoint, because I do feel like, the more mundane work you put in behind your magical efforts, the more bang for your buck you're going to get. So I had noticed that my boss at the time had a statue of Buddha on his desk. And, we got along well enough. And I could tell he was spiritually open-minded. So I asked him if we could have a meeting in the boardroom. I said, I just need 15 minutes of your time. I gave him my version of a crash course in chaos magic, primarily revolving around sigils, and said, now, just hear me out here. I think that some of the things that we see in the context of this stuff is reflected in modern advertising, particularly corporate logos. And he let me, say my piece. I spoke for 15 minutes. We had a short chat after that. And then I brought up the fact, I said, so I want to take this course. And, if you think what I've said today provides value and could be used in the context of sales and marketing, because that's what I was doing at the time there, I was wondering if maybe the company would pay for the course. And goddamn, if he didn't nod his head and say, okay, we're going to do this. The CFO cut me a check that day. And, I've just been doing experiments since then.
That's a great story. I mean, and it's really illustrative of the fact that you can mix magic and the mundane world together. I think a lot of times people have this false notion that if you that you're supposed to keep the two things split apart, and that's not true. I mean, as you know, I also have a similar approach in that I think that the more you marry your mundane actions to your magical work, the more likely it is that the magical work will succeed, because the fact of the matter is, what are you doing? You're paving the way for that realization. I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, I've pulled off some magical workings where, I just did the magic itself and I was able to pull it out. But I think that when I look at that in comparison to where I mixed the magic and the mundane, it was a lot more work and effort to pull off the magic stuff in and of itself, as opposed to seeding the way through mundane actions. So I think that's a great example there of that. And it's pretty ballsy as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, it was for me, it was sort of a moment like, okay, should I get off the pot? Either this stuff works and can cause real change, or it doesn't. And, it could have gone very wrong, but it didn't. And it sort of set me on this course, like since then, that, I had a lot of interesting experiences and successes in that previous company. And then in 2018, well, actually in 2017, I had gotten a promotion. I gotten called into the office. I was doing sales for, it was just over 10 years. And the thing about sales is it doesn't matter how good you did last week. If you're not hitting your numbers by the end of that month, you're probably going to get the boot. I hadn't sold shit in 3 months, and I thought, this was it. Well, it turns out, no, what they were talking to me about is the marketing manager was retiring. And I had made, a comment in passing months prior, hey, I would be interested in that job if it ever came up. And sure enough, that's what they were talking to me about. So I took it. I was ecstatic. It's the first time I was ever in a management position, and I was a one-man shop. Like, we were a small company, but I had started working under the marketing manager, and then I moved into sales because I was getting involved in too many projects that I wasn't terribly interested in, and sales gave me the freedom to sort of like do what I want as long as I was making money, and I was good at it. I did it for 10 years. So I took over that position, and it was fantastic. And I had looked back on, like I didn't know, I didn't have, like, one thing that I'm guilty of is I just can't keep a notebook or a diary for, I've tried 50 times. I bought several nice ones. I've got half finished ones in the real world in a Word doc. It's just for some reason I can't stick with it. So I couldn't trace back exactly what I did, but I know that I had done certain things, whether it was candle magic or sigils or something with a particular spirit or a saint. And it was like, well, fuck, okay, here we are again. So I was in seventh heaven, and then 7 months later, I lost my job. The company bought a competitor, and we were a small company, probably a $7 or $8 million company, which in corporate America isn't very big. And we bought a company that was almost the same size as us, and we got a massive amount of market share. But after 2 years, it turned out we lost a lot of money. Like we were hemorrhaging money. So of course, the first department to go is marketing. I was let go with about 50% of the workforce for that company. And I was like, shit. But my boss was really cool about it. He didn't want to let me go. His father was the CEO of the company. He said, no, ultimately we got to do this and you got to tell him. So he gave me a nice severance package. And, I was out of work for the first time in my life, since I was a teenager. And I thought it was going to be like a vacation, like, hell yeah, 6 months off. But by like the third or fourth week, I started getting really panicky because just, not having that constant in my life, it freaked me out. It actually, I ended up having really severe panic and anxiety attacks over the course of that 2 years until I ended up getting my new job. I'm just going to take a breather because I've just been talking for an excessive amount of time.
That's fine. Yeah, no worries.
So, so from there, I found myself, okay, I'm unemployed. What am I going to do? I kind of just wrote it for a while. I had a few job offerings initially right off the bat, but they were very similar to what I was doing. I was tired of selling office equipment. I really didn't want to do it anymore. I went in for a few interviews. I got the job, and then I said, actually, I got something better, which was a lie. I didn't. And I was like, I was trying to strike a balance between riding out unemployment and, hopefully finding something that I really like. So, it started getting down to the last month of my unemployment. I found 2 jobs that were heavily involved in social media and writing. And I was like, okay, so great. So did a few candle spells. I love candle magic. I'm very partial to it. And I like a lot of the, the hoodoo and conjure traditions. So I borrow heavily from that. And like Judica Isles' Book of 5,000 Spells, I use that like a recipe book. I'll flip it open, I'll read a few things, and then I'll create my own spell based upon those spells that are in there. I will occasionally use something directly out of a book, but for me in particular, I just like to like look at a few things that are going in the same direction and be like, okay, I'm going to whip something up myself. I ended up getting the first job that I applied for, and it was like a 2-week period before I was going to start, and I got an interview for this other job. I had no idea if I was going to like it, but after I got an initial phone call from my boss, and they're like, it's a 4-part interview. Like, are you open to that? And I was like, well, I've never done one before, but these guys must be serious. Went in the following day, and I had a meeting. When I walked out of the office, I was like, okay, this job really seems like it could be a quote unquote dream job. Not because like the products that they sell are things that are personally exciting to me, but because the job gave me the opportunity to do lots of things that I love, writing, shooting and editing video, recording music, doing animation. It was an incredibly creative position in corporate America. So, it was not exactly what I wanted to be doing, but I was excited at the prospect of, being able to use professional tools and get free training for all this. So one of the things I distinctively did was a sweetening spell. Basically, a sweetening sigil on the business card of the hiring manager, a green candle with his name carved into it, submerged in a cup of honey with the card underneath. And there were some other elements to it, but again, I don't write a diary. I fly by the seat of my pants. I went back for the next 2 interviews. And it was really interesting because the third one wasn't with the guy who was hiring. It was with the purchasing manager and the sales manager, two people completely disconnected from my position, but it's the way that the company is done. They do that to try to get a different perspective on the person to make sure they're getting the right people. I passed that, I passed the final one, and I took it. And I, at this point I was like, well, I'm going to lose my unemployment next week. I'm doing this. And the pay was pretty solid. Zoom up to 3 or 4 months in after, I was so taken aback by the culture of this company. I thought I joined a cult. And when I say that, I mean that with the utmost love and respect, because I've never been treated like a human being by a corporate entity before. And it was so shocking. Like, everybody was so nice to each other, and like the way that they take care of their people and the infrastructure they have. And it's not all roses and daisies. There's a lot of accountability, and it goes from the CEO all the way down to the janitor. So everyone is expected to work their ass off. But man, I've never been treated so good in my life by a business. And yeah, I mean, that was one of the major achievements that happened over the course of this time period. Yeah, I'm going to take another breather. Sorry.
That's fine. No worries. No, I mean, I think, this is, I think it's fascinating to hear like how different people approach magical workings and like what they do and how they put it together, and then what the results are. And, people don't always talk about that. So this is really interesting, and I appreciate you sharing it. So continue on with your story.
Awesome. And if anyone is interested and they enjoy these stories, my book, Chaocentric Marketing and the Sorcery of Sales, it is essentially just me telling the story, but with a step-by-step guide, so that if my work resonates with you, you could replicate it if you find yourself in a similar position or want to instigate, a journey like this to get, whatever you're after in life. For me, it was, a really good job where I got to do the things I want, a new vehicle and a new house. And lo and behold, it happened.
That's awesome. And people, you'll be able to find a link in the show notes to the book where you can get it. So just keep an eye for that. Anyway, continue on.
Yeah. Okay. So this brings us up to, I was there for a year before COVID happened, and I was working from home before COVID occurred. So to me, it wasn't much of a culture shock. A lot of people around me and friends, it was, some people loved it. I love working from home. And I don't know if I could ever work in an office again. I have to go in once or twice a month, but it's really not something I have to do all the time. And my wife is working from home as well too.
I have to say, I found it interesting because I was working at the call center. I'm not working there anymore. I'm full-time self-employed again, but I was working at the call center, and it was a culture shock. It was interesting because like part of me was thrilled at the idea of being able to work from home. And then I came to realize like a few weeks in, I was like, no, I'm really not, because I actually like the division between the office space and my home life. And I was like, now I'm dealing with this energy of this call center and these customers in my home where I don't want it to be. So I think it also depends on the kind of job. It was interesting, and of course once I left that job, it was much happier because I no longer had that energy or dealing with the emotional stuff. But I do think, for some people it has been like, yay. And it'll be interesting to see how people readjust to going back to the workplace once things start to open up again.
Yeah. And like in my line of work, I have to go to a lot of conferences, and, there was supposed to be a bunch of travel this year, and it didn't happen. And one of the interesting things I'm seeing from some of these large conferences, like multi-million dollar, 3-day events for marketing and sales professionals, is a lot of them are already saying, moving forward, we are in a different world. Things won't be the same in, the sense a lot of people I think are hoping. So what I'm seeing is that a lot of these organizations, and I expect it to probably happen with, things outside of corporate America, is a dual option. You want to do the virtual one, you do the virtual one. You want the full effect, well, you got to pay a lot more, and the travel and everything, which I personally think is great, because one of the biggest things about going through COVID is, for me personally, like when I was younger, I toured in a band, and I was a heavy drinker at the time, and I always thought I was an extrovert, but it just turned out I was drunk. So, I I don't drink nearly as much as I did when I was younger because I'm, trying to take care of my health and make good decisions. And, I realized ultimately I think I'm actually really an introvert. And I've had a conversation with a lot of other people who feel that they're introverted, and how, in for many people, for me, I mean, COVID was a blessing in disguise. I mean, granted, I was working from home a year before, so it would have been the same. But I haven't had to go on these trips, which tend to really pique my anxiety. And I think a lot of corporate entities and businesses and, small companies, whatever. I mean, if you're digital. And I think a lot of people are learning that there is a major difference between being extroverted and introverted. And I know that I've had these conversations, internally with my company, and friends, and other people who own businesses. And I think that that's going to be one of the major takeaways for this, that giving the people the option to do virtual work or virtual attendance to event, or going in person, makes the most sense. Because, one, for the people who are working virtually, you're going to save money. And if they're more comfortable being at home, they're going to be more productive.
Yeah, and I mean, then you also have the ambivert, the person who can kind of be extroverted sometimes and introverted other times. And so again, being able to pick for that, it just kind of depends. But it is a fascinating thing because you have these different approaches, which really, I mean, when you think about it from an identity perspective with magical work, it kind of becomes down to the same thing. Like, how do you match your magical work to your identity, and then accordingly factor that into the work that you do in order to get the results that you're looking for.
Yeah, for sure. And identity is an interesting thing. I mean, a lot of people in the magical community, I get the impression that, if they have a muggle job, if they're working a 9 to 5, they go in, and for the most part they probably try to hide it. I haven't met too many people who've been openly like practicing, but I don't know if it's just because, it just seemed unassuming. But when I was at my last company, before I took the management position, I was working sales, and I had a cubicle, and I had a altar on my desk. I had a piece of organite, not for magical purposes, but purportedly it disrupts negative electromagnetic energy. So I kept it next to my computer. But I also had an electronic candle in which I would drop pennies on every day, a cup of coffee, which of course they must have thought was mine. I had Papa Legba's Veve, um, and a mojo hand that I had created. And there would be various doodads or icons for other spirits. And, people would come in and out of my cubicle, and nobody ever said a word. And I always thought it was kind of weird, because I thought for sure, especially, some of the people in my office, they were, Baptist or Protestant, and they'd ask me to pray. And I mean, I used to be a Christian when I was younger, so sometimes I would humor them and I'd do it. And I always thought that uncomfortable conversation was going to be coming, but nobody ever said anything about it. And while I'm not like, going into the office dressed as Gandalf, I'm pretty open about my spirituality and my magic. I was with my last boss and my current boss, who's he, I wouldn't say he's a practitioner, but he talks about his cousin who does angel card readings and oracle cards and things of that nature. So I've been fortunate in that. A lot of the people in my professional life haven't been like completely weirded out by me. And also because I do tend to be open, having going back to that conversation with my previous boss, again, that could have gone completely sideways, but it didn't.
I will interject here and say that, I mean, I was open in my workplace, when I was like when I did tech writing. I didn't really say much about it, but like at the call center job, I was definitely open about it. I didn't go and broadcast it, but I didn't hide it either. And part of that was because I was like, well, if people look me up by my name, they're going to find out anyway. So
Right.
I never, like, my manager knew and some of my coworkers knew, and for the most part they didn't say anything. But I also think it depends on the part of the country that you're in. I mean, I'm in Portland, Oregon, and I'm not going to say all of Oregon is liberal, but certainly Portland is. And I think, like, if you're in a more liberal part of the country, people just don't care as much. But it's interesting too, because even in the so-called liberal areas, you actually do find there's a lot of conservatism. I mean, at my call center job, there were definitely people who were conservatives who, voted for Trump, for example, and all that other stuff. And I mean, we're not going to really get into politics here, but it's just kind of a fascinating thing to see. But I think at the same time, people, I don't know if people are more accepting or if it's just kind of a case of, well, if unless the person's broadcasting it. Now, admittedly, I did have my little altars and stuff like that, but nobody really thought anything of it. And part of it is because under the right circumstances, you can also disguise altars as office art, which is one of the things that I did. I would talk about office art sometimes. And I did that as a way, admittedly, of kind of just subtly bringing certain things into the office that maybe otherwise wouldn't have gone there.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, this is my office art. That's a very interesting way to, make your magical practice invisible to anyone who's, like, oh, it's art. Okay, cool. Yeah, he's into art. That makes sense. I had a lot of interesting drawings, some which, like I had the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. Not huge into Kabbalah. I just took it and I mapped the sales process from Malkuth to Keter, which is funny. And yeah, the same thing. I mean, people just thought, oh, he's eclectic, he's a hippie, whatever. And I have long hair. You can't really see it because I have it combed back. So it was probably just thought, it was a rock and roll thing and whatnot, which that magic kind of is. But yeah, to get back to, so once COVID rolled in, we're all at home. I was living in a different house in a different town. It wasn't a bad house. I mean, it served our purpose and we liked it. But, about 3 months before COVID arrived, my wife was like, I don't know if this is our forever home. And, I think we're in a place where, we could take a risk and see if we could do something better. And I hate moving. I hate doing things that, like being bothered with chores. Like I'm bad about that. I need to be better with it. It's one of the things I work on in my life. Like calm down, take care of the things that need to be taken care of and don't look at it as a bad thing. But, moving for me, it was just like, oh God, it's such a pain in the ass, especially if, we weren't sure if we were going to get a moving company or do everything ourselves. And I wasn't really feeling it, but my wife is extremely intuitive and I trusted her and I said, okay, let's do this. So we instigated this process where, we brought in contractors, we painted the entire interior. We did, we were ripping things out, putting new things in. And right when that was at the peak of it, like COVID just burst onto the media. And, by the time we realized how serious it actually was, it was like, geez, we can't back out of this even if we want. I mean, we had, a good chunk of change vested into 3 different contractors. And it was like, well, shit, we're just going to have to go through this. So again, go to my little bag of tricks, lots of candle magic, lots of sigils. And one of the things that I did that I'd always thought of, be like, someday I'm going to do that. And I'm glad I remembered because it's the type of thing that could have slipped through is the Saint Joseph spell where you bury his statue upside down facing the house. And granted, there's a few different versions of it, very simple. And I was like, you know what? I've always wanted to do that. I'm going to do it. So I got the statue. I buried him upside down. I said the prayer that came with the card. And then I added some prayers that I found on the internet. And then I just did some prayer, just internally kind of improving because while I'm not a Christian anymore, it's left an indelible mark for better or worse. So in a way, it was almost easier for me to like tap into that stream of thought, to tap into the idea of that spirit.
Use what you know.
Yeah. And, I'll be damned, man. It's rare that I'll do a piece of magic and it happens so quickly and so like intensely that it's literally like, no shit. So this was maybe a week before we put the house on the market. We figured it's going to take at least 3 or 4 weeks, month, 2, whatever. Within 48 hours, we had 9 people lined up to come in and look at the house. But before the end of that 48-hour period, the first person to come look at the house said, I want to buy the house. I'll buy it for the price that you've listed it. And I mean, it was a nice little chunk of profit. And we were like, fuck yeah, okay, we're doing this, done. And we were expecting it to be a much more drawn out experience, not only because of COVID, but our realtor said, this could be a very complicated dynamic process. And it wasn't. It was one of the easiest moves we've ever done, which isn't to say I want to do it again anytime soon.
Hopefully you won't. Let's take a quick breather.
Sure thing.
All right. So Yeah, I mean, I would not, I don't like moving myself. Kind of like when we got into the current place that we're in, which is actually kind of the ideal place. This was a couple years ago, mind you, but it's like a nice airy place. It's something that really fits us well and was enough space for all of us compared to the place we've been before. It's kind of like, I don't want to move anytime soon because moving is an exhausting experience. I mean, I actually just recently got rid of like 2 crates worth of books because I'm like, no, I don't want to have to move those. I'm done with that. Like, I'm just gonna make my life easier. So, I mean, it's kind of a funny little thing there, but it's amazing how sometimes our best magical work is done around the aversion of having to deal with stuff too. Like, you find that perfect place and you're like, okay, that's it. I'm locked in. Boom.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the aversion of having to deal with something you don't want to, or being forced to deal with something you don't want to, or just um, I guess the rubber really hits the road. Losing, I probably did some of the most and focused and probably the most amount of magic I've ever done in my life. One, when I lost my job and the magic to get a new one, and then selling my old house, during a pandemic, um, which ultimately led to us getting what literally was a dream house. And we didn't know that was going to happen. We had planned on buying waterfront property somewhere, but it takes time for all of the bureaucracy to go through with the paperwork. There was a ton of houses we were really amped up about at the beginning of the process, and as we got down to the like the 3 week time period where we had to set everything up so that we could get out in enough time for the new people to come in and go into a new house, the housing market was decimated. Like, it was the complete opposite of what I expected. The housing market went through the roof. People were buying houses left and right, uh, rather than the housing market crashing, which in one way was really good because we got a great price for our house. But the flip side of that was there wasn't a lot of availability. And you know we went to look at one house and my wife was like, oh, I really like it, let's, and she was already starting to make comments about, let's do this with the upstairs and the downstairs, and it was nice, but I wasn't really feeling it. And after all the effort we had put into it, um, there was this one house where we had both looked at the photos and the colors are really funky in my house. I don't know if you can tell, but this is my room, my recording studio slash temple. The walls are salmon colored, which is not a color I would have ever expected to go with. And I first was like, it was out of being lazy, but it's actually growing on me. And my house is very eclectic. There's a section of walls that are yellow. There's a dark apple red in the living room. It's very much has this like New England Cape Cod beach house feel. We live in we live on a lake in New England. We're not on the ocean. And when we both saw the pictures, like, I was like, you know what? If we see this in person, I think we'll like it. And my wife was like, no, absolutely not. Those pictures look awful. And so after we had went to see that other house, I was like, just humor me. Let's just go see it. Let's just give it a shot. And when we pulled up into the driveway, she was the first one to say, like, from outside, like, oh man, it's really nice outside. It's too bad, like, the inside is so funky. And so the realtor shows up, the other realtor meets our realtor. We go in, and within 5 minutes of walking through the door, we were both like, oh my God, this house was built for us. And I mean,
Salmon colored walls and all.
yeah, seriously. I know, I am not a salmon or pink guy, and it's grown on me. I had initially planned on painting it like shortly after moving in, but I put it off because I mean, the day of the move, there's weird things that happen when you have a lot of magical stuff collide at once. And one, it was probably buying a house in the middle of a pandemic, but our house closed on the last minute, and we had to like get out of the old house on the same day we were moving into our house. We didn't have a choice. It's just how the transition occurred. And we moved into our new house during a hurricane. And it was just sort of that, I don't know, something weird shit like that happens, whether it's weather or just odd events. Like, I was trying to get to the new house on a back road, and the side of the road was on fire. There was a fire truck, like, so I had to turn around and go back a whole other way. My in-laws, my parents, my wife, were all taking different routes, and the trees are flipping like this. And we get to the house, and I'm just thinking like, oh my God, we're gonna move into the new house, and a tree's gonna fall on us, because I mean, was batshit crazy. And I can't say for sure, like, oh yeah, sure, I did that, or it was a byproduct of that. But it just seems weird whenever I achieve something magically that really has an internal, like, it produced something. Weird shit like that always accompanies it.
I think there is something to be said for that. I mean, when you do intense magical work, you have to understand and expect that there may be some intense byproducts that come out of that. I mean, I did some really intense work in June/July of this last year to get me out of the job, because I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I'm stressed out. This is really hurting my productivity. And part of it was that, I was like, okay, I'm going to write a couple more books on magic, because that's what really sells. I mean, I love writing fiction, but it's not my bestseller, not yet. So I did that, and I did some other stuff too, though, and like things just worked out really well, and then things kind of didn't work out so well for a little period there, but unfortunately I got things figured out. But I mean, part of that I think was kind of just like, okay, like you're calling all this stuff up, and I think this is why it's really important to sometimes be careful, like with what you ask for, and careful with what you do, because it's like, yeah, you can get that, but there may be, you may be really testing the walls of reality, as it were, and you may end up having some side effects bleed through as a result.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely true. And there are times where I guess you call it magical burnout, or almost the antithesis of that, where it's like the energy is pulsing so much that you're just like, okay, I'm gonna shut everything down for like a few weeks. Like I go through phases where I just stop everything, even my daily practices for the most part. It's not often that happens, but like I would say probably 3 to 6 times over the past 10 years, which is about how long I've been, ardently practicing magic. I've needed to just shut everything down for a little while, because, particularly when you're doing magical experiments and you're willing to take risks, and, you get the burnt fingers occasionally. Uh, yeah, you do come into spaces where you realize, okay, you have to remember that this stuff is real. And even like, because there's times when I do magic, and I get very little indication from the universe or physical space that it's working, but I never let that get me down. I always give it a certain time frame. But yeah, I mean, there's moments where, you have a couple of different things that maybe you didn't expect to kind of like cross, and when those two currents hit, it makes, some interesting fireworks in your life. Um,
And
so
and, and
yeah,
I think there is something to be said too for recognizing like when it's good to take a break, because if you don't take a break, eventually a break will happen to you. I mean, that's basically what happened to me this last summer, was that it just, I hit again, I smacked into a wall, and it was kind of like, you're done for a while. And it's really only been in the last couple of months that I've really started. So it's been almost a half a year that I've really started to even get back into things more. And so I kind of take that as I mean, I think that's wise that you've done that. It's certainly something that I'm going to remember to do from now on, because sometimes I've just been so, because I'm like super intense into it on everything else. And I'm kind of like, you need to know when to take a break. And it's like, you should have taken the entire month of August off instead of pushing forward the way you did. That was just like absolutely wrong. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I learned that lesson in hindsight. But for those of you watching, learn from Julian. This is smart stuff to do. Don't follow my advice. Learn from him. Take that break proactively, not reactively.
yeah, yeah. Getting forced into a break because you went too hard too fast is it's not always a fun experience. It's usually a very good lesson, but that
It's
goes
Wile E.
for
Coyote hitting that wall.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, don't light the TNT now. Um, yeah, so
So I'm curious about something, because I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before the recording started, that I talked about like the suit that you're wearing, and you talked about that as a form of identity work, and how you were you for a while felt kind of a little self-conscious about, but all of a sudden you're like, you started buying clothes. So I mean, looking at your overall working, what do you feel had to change about your identity in order for things to occur? Because I think, like, in a way, like with a lot of what you're talking about, both the job and the house, there were certain crucial things that had to happen internally in order to manifest that stuff externally. At least that's what I read from it, as a result of hearing you talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess it started in earnest, probably, let's see, March. So just around the beginning of COVID, both my wife and I were working at home. And, because of just being home constantly, it was very easy to get into a drinking habit. And I mean, I drank heavily on and off for quite some time. But, during that period, it started to get a little bit out of control. And so I brought in another, let's call it an alkaloid into my life, something that I've used to do shadow work in the past. And I went real deep with this. And I had a series of experiences from March till October, which I would define as intense spiritual work, shadow work, which is ultimately looking at a lot of things over the course of my life that I had buried and put like a steel cap on it with no intention of ever letting it out. And, the negative habits that I was developing were a byproduct of those poor decisions. So with the tools that I was using to kind of rip that cap off and deal with some of my inner demons, for lack of a better word, that's where a lot of this transformation came from. During that time, I was binge watching the show The Magicians because I had read the books and I love them. And the show has its pros and cons, but simultaneously during this time, I was reading the Crestomancy series written by Diana Wynne Jones. And it was interesting because the character of Crestomancy and the character of Elliot in The Magicians, they both dress very similarly. And they're both sort of problematic characters. Like they're extremely powerful, but they're also completely flawed. And there was something in both of those characters that kind of helped me deal with some internal things that I hadn't dealt with. And going through that process and dealing with that inner darkness, for lack of a better term, and dealing with the emotions and clearing out the muck. One of the things that I had realized was that, for a long time, I had always wanted to dress nice. And these two characters had a profound effect on me because they both sort of dress like this. And it just seemed to be like second nature. And despite their flaws, they had this, fantastic sense of fashion, which, like I said, ever since I was like 15 or 17, I always wanted to dress like that. And I never was confident enough to do it. And so in the middle of doing all this, intense shadow work, kicking a bad drinking habit and dealing with really intense spiritual powers, I decided, one of the things I'm going to do as I make this major transition from my old house to my new house, from my old life to this new life, I'm going to buy a few 3-piece British style tweed suits. I actually ended up getting 4. And from the first time I put it on, I mean, it was incredible, like the effect that it had on my mind. Just I feel more confident when I dress like this. And it's funny because, it's like, why did I wait so long to do this? And the reason I waited so long to do it is because I had a lot of things telling me, like, you can't do that. You couldn't possibly pull that off. There's no way anyone will take you serious. Like, you think you can dress like this? And that's just a very small spackle of, the internal shit that I was dealing with, which was a lot. It was deep. It was a lot of personal stuff. But by the time, I had come to the end of this transformation with the tools that I used to do that, I had this new image, I guess you could say. I mean, I don't dress like this all the time. I dress comfortable when I'm hanging out on my couch or whatever. But anytime I've gone into the office recently, this is the second podcasts I've done in the past couple of months, I dress this way because I guess you'd call it glamour magic. I mean, I don't know anything about that term outside of what would make sense to me, but I feel empowered when I dress this way. And I have 4 different colors. This is a red one. I have a blue one, a gray one, and a green one. I'm eventually hoping to collect the right colors to synchronize a suit with the color associated with the spirit and the hour of the day for the Art of Drawing Spirits into Crystals by Johann Trithemius.
Very cool. So where can people find you on the internet?
Can find me on Facebook. That would be the best place. Just look up Julian Crane. I have a Turkish evil eye talisman as my icon. It's 2 concentric blue rings and a black dot. So you'll know that's the right Julian Crane if you found me. I've written several books, and if you Google them, you'll find them. One is Interview with the Magus, and that was the book that was a compendium of all the articles I had written when I was doing interviews for disinfo.com before that site kind of crashed and burned. You were part of that interview process. My most latest book is Chaocentric Marketing and the Sorcery of Sales, which is basically the story I told you today, but with step-by-step applications of the type of magic I was doing for each moment to push this whole trajectory along. I have a fantasy novel, which will hopefully be one of 3. It's called A Labyrinth of Dreams. And for the mundane side of writing, I have another book called Music, Mischief, and Marketing, a guerrilla's guide for the creative protagonist.
Very cool. Yeah, that's awesome. And I look forward to seeing more of your work as time goes on, because I know you'll continue producing. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for coming on today. Any final thoughts you want to share with us before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I suppose anyone who's listening to this, if you're currently doing magic and you're on the fence about, are you good? Are you doing the right thing? Just keep doing it. Just keep experimenting. Be careful. Because if you burn your fingers, you will know. But it is real, and the complexities of reality and what real means is a very diverse idea. Reality is incredibly different for each human being. We are all universes within ourselves, and within that universe, magic works somehow. So find whatever inspiration it is, find a goal, and just go out and do the work. Excellent.
Well, it was wonderful to have you on here. It's been a while since we've talked like this, so I've really enjoyed it. And I would definitely say to my viewers and listeners, keep an eye out for more of Julian's work. And he's also in the Magical Experiments Facebook group. So, if you guys have questions, feel free to shoot him some there. For sure. All right.